Welcome back. You're watching Morning Express. We're reviewing the press, and with me in studio is Stella Agara, who's a governance analyst, as well as Stephen Mwakesi, who's a public policy analyst. And we are taking a look at what's making headlines. We've talked about the BBI court date, jolting referendum plans. There's also what's being referred to as battle royale in the Standard newspaper, and the showdown that is looming in the courts. And of course, this is very critical, and it's a developing story that we shall keep you well informed on as the days go by. But of course, there's so many other stories that are making headlines. I'd like to draw our panelists' attention to a scandalous story that is in page 6 of the Daily Nation. And told Uhuru Ruto power struggles are being blamed for the stalled Kimwarer Aror dam projects. Italian firms quoted press reports saying the DPU has been a vocal supporter of the projects because it would benefit the people in his backyard. And apparently the politics that is at play in the country are feeding into whether or not these projects go ahead. What do you make of this, Mr. Mwakesi?
Well, I think for me, when I look at this dynamics of Kimwarer and Aror, they were conceived to be some of the most progressive water projects in Rift Valley.
Right.
But then suddenly there was a question as to whether would they be the sort of projects that would probably propel the Deputy President quite highly,
yes,
as opposed to what the intent of some of the players at that time were thinking. And again, there was a question of whether there was impropriety in terms of how the tenders were secured and money is paid. And these are questions that Kenyans have been asking and have been wanting to know what's the real truth behind it. And at some point, you know, it became quite a very interesting circus, because suddenly we had a cabinet secretary and a principal secretary indicted over the matter. Then suddenly the principal secretary, who's the accounting officer, suddenly turns into a state witness against the policy head, and that's the cabinet secretary. Next thing we know, in a speech, the deputy president says he has information that he will wait until the right time is ripe so that he can unleash about Aurora and Kimwarer, and we've been seated here as Kenyans waiting for that information that will probably shock Kenyans on what is happening there. So when you look at all of these dynamics and when you look at the parliamentary processes around it, it reeks of a lot of political machinations. And ideally, when you look at these two projects, you can see that it is one camp fighting the other camp. It's not lost on Kenyans that the principal secretaries who have been holding that docket have tended to come from one side of the divide. And what we've been seeing happening has been in such a manner that even the way there was a presidential commission that was set up to look into the feasibility of both projects. And one of the recommendations was that one of the dams was completely not feasible.
Yes.
And the other was recommended to be relooked at, and then suddenly the president decided to cancel the entire thing altogether. So the chronology of events that have happened around these two projects, for me, does not show that there was some semblance of a very cogent thinking around what to do about them, but it seemed more about what can be done to stop the progression of particular individuals in a different area.
Right.
But for me, I still believe if we were to put politics aside, some of these projects would have been completely transformational for the country.
Yes.
And if we had safeguarded them away from any form of corruption, corruption cannot be excused coming from any side of the divide.
Yeah. And according to a court document here, we're told it seems highly coincidental that the highest ranking official to be invested and charged in the criminal proceedings in Kenya's Treasury is Kenya's Treasury Cabinet Secretary Mr. Henry Rotich, an ally of Mr. Ruto. That is the former CS who was in charge of Treasury at the time of that this scandal actually broke out. What do you make of this, Ms. Agara?
I think one of the claims that we must completely get out of this conversation is the fact that the former cabinet secretary for finance was being charged just because he's an ally of the deputy president. Irrespective of whether it was him or some other person who was responsible for the procurement process, the buck stops at them and they would have been charged for the same. But having said that, we are not disputing that there could be some political, intrigues behind this whole thing. But one of the things that we must guard against, and I am on record here as having said severally,
yes,
that for us, when it comes to corruption cases, we must keep our eyes on the ball. Irrespective of who feels some political games are being played, we must check that Kenyans' money is being spent with efficacy. We must check that Kenyans are getting value for money as those projects are being implemented, and we must check that procurement processes are being followed. There are a number of steps that were floated. There are a number of illegalities in this transaction that were identified. If the courts find that the former CS is not guilty and somebody else is, all Kenyans want to see is that the people who are responsible for flouting some procurement rules are actually brought to book. They want to see that if there's any resources that were lost, that those resources are recovered.
Yes.
And apart from that, they also want to see that if there was any impropriety on the side of the international company that was, or rather firm that was contracted, or impropriety from our end, then it needs to be dealt with. And for me, especially when it comes to matters of corruption, I don't care if it's the president or the deputy president or the former prime minister or my own father who's going to be caught as the culprit and be punished for it. Eventually, whoever is responsible for corruption must be dealt with.
Right.
Because we cannot be living in a country where we have projects that were worth, was it 63 billion? We are still debating on how much it was worth, and then have people who are sleeping hungry. It is not acceptable, not now, not in the future. And so, irrespective of what this Italian firm thinks or feels, the case should be taken to its completion, and anybody who was responsible for the flouting of the rules must face the law.
Okay, let's take a look at another story that has had Kenyans shocked, and this has to do with the disappearance of a young girl. Now, police in Kitengela have arrested a boda operator in connection with the kidnapping and murder of an 8-year-old girl whose body was found dumped in a thicket. The boda rider is said to have been in possession of a phone reportedly used to contact the girl's mother, demanding 300,000 shillings in ransom. Elsewhere in Dagoretti, a mother was reunited with her son who went missing close to 2.5 years ago. Richard Tinina tells us more.
It is here at the Orata non-Kopiri in Kitengela that the body of 8-year-old Chantel Nzembi was found stashed in a sack a day after she went missing from her home in a shoot Kitengela.
Mwili ilikuwa bado fresh sana. Mtoto hata nikaliogeshwa juu bado mwili ina shine kabisa. Kitu tu iko ni hiyo damu yenye walimrepia, damu iko na iko kwa hiyo sheet yenye walimfunikia.
Chantel was playing with her friends before she went missing on Sunday at around 5 p.m. Hours later, her mother received a phone call demanding 300,000 shillings in ransom. Police have now arrested one man linked to the kidnapping and murder of the grade 2 pupil. The suspect, a boda operator, was picked up at the Kitengela bus stage. Police say they are now pursuing a woman believed to be the one who made the call to Chantel's mother. Elsewhere in Dagoretti, mother and son were reunited after close to 2.5 years at the Neema Land Queens and Kings Center in Riruta Satellite. This after KTN News on Monday told of the agony of 31-year-old Jacqueline Kahenya, whose son went missing.
My son told me, Mom, come and see the news. I see it on Monday. And then we saw our contacts there.
Roniko Mondi, then 8 years old, went to see off his auntie, who had visited them in Kiambiu slums, never to return home. Ronik has been living at the rescue center since the 7th of January 2019, a day after he went missing, and was brought in by a good Samaritan who found him stranded along the Kabiria Road in Riruta Satellite.
Kwa leo niko na furaha mingi sana, ile sikuwa natarajia, lakini sasa kwa mkono wa Mungu nimefaulu kile nilikuwa natafuta. So I'm very much okay. And I'm very much happy. I'm the happiest mother in the world.
Rita Tinina, KTN News.
I mean, two completely different outcomes to a very devastating situation. The loss of children. One is found, the other found, but not in a way that is, Good. Now, Stella, what do you make of this?
They say a society is judged by how they treat their children. Last year, during the 16 days of activism celebration, the Ministry of was it Ministry of ICT, I think, at the time, presented a report on gender-based violence, and it actually indicated that there was quite an escalation in gender-based violence in the country as a result of the COVID stresses and the lockdown.
Yes.
But then also violence against children had actually increased tremendously. And then, of course, we had that pathetic record of the number of girls, young girls who had actually been impregnated by relatives, uncles, and the likes. And now we are taking our bad manners out of the home. We are now kidnapping children and actually asking for ransom out of their parents. I think we really, really need to stop this madness. The state should make an example of these elements who have been arrested, so that anybody else who will think or even attempt to make such a move will actually have to think really hard before they engage. Right. It's just a few weeks ago that, I mean, it must have been a fortnight ago that another man was caught somewhere in Limuru who actually attempted to rape a girl, and she just got lucky that he didn't kill her. It's irresponsible for us to have a society where we think we can do this kind of thing to children. And it's even more disturbing because we have had to lock them down. They have not been playing. They have not had a chance to actually, be creative. And then now we make it even more difficult to release them to go outside and get fresh air. I think we need to make our environment safe for children. We need to make our environment safe for young girls and ensure that then they still have an opportunity to be able to grow and explore without fearing attacks from the madmen that our society has bred. But then we also must ask ourselves a very difficult question, Trix. What kind of circumstances have we put Kenyans in? And I'm not justifying these people, but what kinds of circumstances have we put Kenyans in to the point that they're desperate enough to abduct children?
For 300,000.
For small money that they could actually work for. I think we really need to think hard about these things and ensure that then we buffer Kenyans from the economic struggles that they're dealing with, so that we avoid situations where they're going to succumb to crime or resort to crime, and this kind of crime, that then eventually ends up harming the most vulnerable people in our society. We must be reminded that our Constitution indicates that we must act in the best interest of our children at all times.
Yes.
And that should be a reminder to everyone.
Yeah. Mr. Mokesi, I mean, this child's life was basically valued at 300,000 shillings, and the failure to give that result in what we are seeing in the news right now. What does that say about our community or our nation?
Trix, I think this was a very sad occasion, and my condolences to the family for what has happened. I think ideally, as Stella has rightly said, there's something that we need to really consider as a country. How we are looking at, one, the economic question in terms of ensuring that we do not let people go down the drain in terms of how they consider how they can help themselves, and not using the lives of other people as a stepping stone to what they would find as economic sustainability.
Yes.
But again, my key concern is also on the question of as a government, has there been serious discussions within communities on how to ensure this proper vigilance in terms of how are we keeping our communities safe? How are we ensuring the people who are operating within our communities are capable of being good caretakers to our children, to our mothers, to our grandfathers, people like that in our society. I think there are a lot of safeguards that we used to have in the past that we've completely let go of, and there's a humongous breakdown. We're dealing with very weird cases all across the country of people being murdered, body parts being chopped off, and being done by normal people who would naturally cross on the street, or you'd find, you know, within the community. So there's a long conversation we need to have as a country about how are we creating the community safeguards that are keeping our people safe, even at the very low level of the village, you know. And when we start such kind of conversations, we might be able to see a change in how things are going. But as we've rightly said, the question of economics is an important one. And then the other thing, Trix, that I want to commend KTN for is that it's important that you do highlight some of these cases more and more. I like the last bit where you were able to reconnect a child with a mother. If that case was not highlighted, chances are the child would have stayed in that home for a significant portion of their lives. So I think we should encourage our media to have more and more of these social conversations, highlighting more of these social stories that have a real impact on how we transform our communities. And also we need to speak directly to people about the need of being good citizens to each other, and not succumbing to the wants of criminality to be able to satisfy our economic burdens.